Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to introduce to you now. Alison Smart has a teenage daughter who was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes almost 3 years ago. Her family found that lifestyle modifications, dietary changes, and a regimen of daily injections using the basal insulin Levemir enabled her daughter to achieve excellent blood glucose results. Alison's daughter is an athlete who experiences a typical teenage life with little disruption from diabetes. However, in November of 2023, Novo Nordisk announced that Levemir insulin would be discontinued. This announcement came just after 2 months of Novo Nordisk announcing that they would significantly decrease the price of this insulin. Alison got to work and joined with others who are also incredulous at the thought of being left with the only option of two other basal insulins or an insulin pump. They created the Alliance to Protect Insulin Choice, started a petition on change.org, compiled a YouTube video full of testimonials, and met with several senators and congressional representatives in Washington, D.C. They continue to move forward with their goal of pressuring Novo Nordisk to slow down the discontinuation and produce Levemir until a biosimilar basal insulin is available. Alison Smart, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you to Boundless Body Radio.
Thank you, Casey. I appreciate this.
It's such an honor to have you on. I think people will realize just from that introduction how important this discussion is going to be. I can't imagine what it must feel like to be in the position you're in, which we're going to talk all about. And I do just want to say before we start getting into this episode, you're no pressure on this one, but you do have a little bit of competition in this episode. I'm looking outside my window. We're both outside of Salt Lake City. It is a gorgeous day. It is sunshine, blue skies, hint of wind. It is the perfect day. So again, no pressure, but if you're not the most amazing guest we've ever hosted on this show ever, I might just leave. You can finish up here, but no pressure, no pressure.
I agree. Same thing outside my window. So it's beautiful.
This weekend was amazing, especially coming off the hills of last year. This time last year, I was still shoveling like January amounts of snow.
Right?
It was ridiculous around here.
Yep, I agree.
Terrible. Yeah, good snow year for the ski resorts is like 500 inches, and they got 900 last year. So it was a terrible year for any non-skiers out there who had to shovel a lot of snow like myself. But anyway, just grateful for the nice weather outside right now.
Yeah, me too. Absolutely. I agree.
That's awesome. Well, yeah, we were introduced by a mutual friend, Nayuri Missisian, who we've had on the show. Love her and her content. She does such a great job. And if she recommends somebody, we don't necessarily need to vet them out. We just get them on the show as quickly as possible. So let's kind of dive into this story about your daughter. We hear all the time about type 1 diabetes and how it starts and how grateful we are to live in a time where this is not a fatal disease like it would have been 110 years ago, really. So take us through kind of your story and your daughter's story and how this started to impact your life.
Sure. So November of 2021, it was Thanksgiving weekend. We were out at a restaurant and just noticed that my daughter, who was 13 at the time, was drinking a lot of water. And it was actually her 18-year-old sister came up to me and said, "Mom, Ruby's showing the signs of type 1 diabetes." She had my other daughter had a good friend with it. And because of that, she had done a big paper for school. And anyway, the next day we got her checked out and found out she had type 1 diabetes. It just kind of really took us, it was a surprise. And then just the first few months, you just kind of, it's a bit of a haze. You just do your best. But we discovered a few months in that if we made some dietary changes and we discovered this Levemir insulin and we really kind of got things under control. She's been a tennis player this whole time. She was before her diagnosis. She plays nearly every day in a practice or a match. And because of the type of management we were able to figure out, she's had very little disruption due to diabetes to her tennis playing and just being a teenager. So I'm not going to say it's easy. It's been a challenge, but I'm proud of her. She's doing great. And that's kind of our journey.
Wow. Okay, so I want to go back to that day. That is a very quick turnaround, going from dinner to diagnosis in 12 hours, 16 hours, whatever that was. Exactly. In hindsight, were there other warning signs that you now look back and say like, oh, okay, she was losing weight, she was urinating frequently, any of those things that we hear about type 1 diabetes, or was it really just that instantaneous?
No, absolutely. So that was in November. And I looked back at that previous summer, starting in July, that she had been losing weight. She actually lost about 20 pounds, which is a lot as a 13-year-old. And And I noticed even her tennis coach was saying, "What's up?" You know, we thought she was just kind of stretching out. So I just looked back, and she had been mentioning for a while that even her friends had noticed that she'd finish her water bottle that she'd bring to school at the end of first period, you know. So it had gone on for a while.
Yeah. Still, I mean, those are kind of subtle things. The weight loss would be a bit concerning at that age, but still kind of subtle. The drinking thing would be tough to diagnose. Now, when you were first diagnosed, how much help did you get from your doctor or the person who did the diagnosis? Was there a lot of education that was given at the time?
Yeah, there was a lot. We were in the hospital for 3 days. And much of that was so that they could monitor her blood glucose levels, and a ton of education. But we really kind of figured out our way on our own. A few months later, I did my own research about what type of basal insulins there were on the market. And I just knew from all the research I did that there are 3 basal insulins, and that this one, Levemir, has a shorter time of action. It's about 14 hours. And the other 2 groups, there's the Lantus and the biosimilars, they have about 24 hours. And then there's Tresiba, which is Degludec. It's confusing because there's a brand name and a generic name for each one, even though there aren't generics available for 2 of the 3 types. But I just knew right off that this Levemir would be perfect for her. She's a teenager who has basal insulin needs that fluctuate all the time. Hormones are one of the drivers of insulin need, and we know that teenagers have hormones that fluctuate throughout the month. And even teenage boys have hormones that fluctuate. And I just knew this would be perfect for her. We found that on our own, and we found a group of people who helped us with dietary changes. We just figured out that the food you eat makes a big effect for sure. And she's doing great. She's keeping normal blood sugar levels. Sure, we go a little high and a little low sometimes, but we're not having huge swings, and we feel like we've kind of got this down, which is nice.
Yeah, that's really nice. I'm so encouraged that you were able to get some really good information in the hospital, that they kept her for that long, and you felt like you at least had somewhat of a handle on it. I know you said it was kind of a haze the first few months, but it's cool that you at least got some education there. Was there any education on diet in specific, or is it just basically like you need to eat, the same foods that other kids are eating at the time, which then you need to cover off with insulin? Like, did they give you any dietary type of education while you were there?
No, they just taught us how to manage whatever we eat, and that really wasn't a topic of discussion. So we found that on our own several months in.
Okay. So what was those first few months like? Again, it felt like it was a haze, but what kind of trials were you going through to try to get some of this stuff right? What are the inherent challenges of doing dosing with insulin when the pancreas is not doing it? You're essentially trying to be the pancreas yourself. What kind of challenges and mishaps did you encounter in those first few months?
It's super challenging because I think of myself as a pretty bright person. I was pretty good at math, but you have to be this mathematician. The way they taught us, you're counting the carbs and the ounces and dividing, and I would spend so much time, deciding, okay, you've got this meal, this is how many carbs. We actually do it much differently now because we're eating more of a low carb diet. We're careful with the foods that we eat, and so it's a little different now. But at the time, I would sit and watch. We got a couple weeks in, we were able to get a continuous blood glucose monitor, which we call a Dexcom. And so I would just sit at home while she was at school or tennis or wherever she was, and I would just watch the numbers go high and low, and I would think, I didn't get it right. I mean, it's just so tricky. It's you kind of beat yourself up as a parent trying to match the insulin to the food, and it's tricky for sure.
Wow. Okay. I just also noticed before getting on this call that you and I have a mutual friend in Artie Dykman, whose son went through something very, very similar. He describes a very similar type of thing where this guy is not stupid. He's pretty smart. He's an engineer. And it's this equation that he would always think he had sorted out. And it would remind him every single day that, no, you do not have this sorted out. What a challenge that would be.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Wow.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So when did you start to learn that there were other people like him that were doing this in a different way, that were addressing dietary concerns?
It was about 3 or 4 months in. I was looking around online, watching, who's getting good blood glucose results, who's not. And I was kind of realizing that diet absolutely is a factor. And so I was able to connect with some of these people and actually meet a bunch of them in person who are able to, a lot of them are athletes who are able to get these good blood glucose results. And so a lot of it was on social media. You know, it's crazy. I was not big on social media before all this, but it's taught me a ton. But it's not just that. I've met a lot of these people in person, and we share recipes and ideas, and this works better than this, and this is what works on game days and practice days. And it's ideal examples, like it's ideal for us to eat a couple hours before and not be eating right before. We don't like to have fast acting insulin on board, things like that. So you really do learn the method pretty cool. We did.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic. Was Type 1 Grit also R.D. Dykman's kind of doing? Was that one of the groups that you were following?
Yeah, yep, super helpful.
Yeah,
Yep,
it sounds like that kind of community. It's not only one person sharing information, but the whole group, case studies, and we tried this. That whole thing seems like that would be very, very helpful and feel very supportive in a community that there's other kids out there that are choosing to do this. The story that you hear so often is like, well, kids are not going to want to be on a different diet than their friends. They're not going to want to be on a different diet than their family. What have you noticed as far as willingness to comply to a lower carbohydrate type diet?
for my daughter,
Yeah.
or just in general. So we just went all in as a family. We changed what's in our house, and we've all become healthier. So she's the youngest. My other two are out of the house, but they know this is just kind of the way we do things here, and it's not, and her friends know, and it makes things a lot easier for us, for sure.
Wow, that's really savage. All of you just changed. No pushback from anybody else?
I mean, I wouldn't say it's a piece of cake. It takes, but we make, we eat great food. I make a great ice cream birthday cake for her birthdays. We like Rebel ice cream. We like lasagna that we make with egg life wraps, and we make tacos, and but we use cheese shells. We kind of have it down, and she's healthy, and we're all healthy, and it works for us. A big platform of mine as I'm working on this insulin is that there are different ways to manage diabetes, and I definitely have a way that works great for us. But I just think, people ought to be able to feel free about managing it their own way.
Yeah, I love that. What about when she is not in the home? Do you worry that, like, while she's at school or at a friend's house or all those things you hear about, is that much of a concern for you?
It's not, we have good communication, and we just figure it out. It's not a big deal.
I love it. That's great. Okay, so I am curious about this now. You said your whole family kind of adopted this and you just switched over, didn't make a big deal out of it. Seems like it was very simple. The diet sounds really good to me, all the stuff I would normally eat as well. What things surprised you as far as health improvements? You mentioned that pretty much everybody noticed that their health improved. A common one that people say is they lose weight or lose fat, but there's so many other side benefits that come along. What were some of the things you and the rest of your family noticed by switching over to this way of eating?
We've all bought new clothes because we've lost weight.
Good problem.
So new wardrobes. I mean, it's not, I just feel like we're healthier. That's just the biggest thing.
Yeah, nice. Better energy, less
Absolutely.
fatigue, mental
Yep.
clarity, all that kind of stuff,
Oh,
mood regulation.
for
That's
sure.
great. That's great. And is it to the point where it's also self-motivating for your daughter that she can just stay on this pretty easily? And those other things like a neighbor's house or school are not that tempting for her to go off?
Yeah, I just don't, she doesn't feel, at first she would take her own stuff, if we were going where they had ice cream sundaes, we'd bring our ice cream, but now it's not a big deal to her. She doesn't feel, I mean, it's just different today. Everybody's got a food thing, right? She's got a buddy who's a vegetarian, or a buddy who's doesn't want to eat fish. It's not, I don't think kids see it as much different, really.
Yeah, well, that's great. That's really encouraging to hear that. Did you get any pushback from the medical community, or were they just happy about where her numbers were?
Um, I mean, so we don't talk about that part of it much. I just find that it's easier to just, I mean, because it typical, when someone doesn't have type 1 diabetes and they go to the doctor, they don't usually talk about what you're eating. So it just hasn't really been a point of conversation for us.
Were they impressed that her numbers were better and that she was dosing, hopefully way less insulin than other kids that they were, diagnosing and working with? Or just
Yeah.
not really a thing? They were.
Our physician now is absolutely, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. That's really encouraging. So we've had this explained at many like kind of deep levels, but let's just say you're at one of your daughter's tennis matches, and another parent is talking to you about why, maybe a diagnosis of their child having type 1 diabetes, how would you explain it to somebody who maybe might not know much about the disease, why it is that a lower carbohydrate diet can help manage type 1 diabetes? Like, what would you want somebody to know about that?
I would say, with type 1 diabetes, there are very few foods that are free. I mean, the only food really that's free for us is maybe diet soda or maybe cucumbers or pickles. That's it. Like, I mean, meat, even vegetables require some insulin. So to me, bottom line, if you're eating foods that you're not having to dose that much for, like, we eat a lot of whole foods, we eat protein, and we eat a lot of vegetables, but we don't eat starches and sugars, and it just makes it so much easier and that everything with our lives is about making things easier. So she can be an athlete, so she can, do her thing on her own and not have to worry about it. If we're dealing with higher carb counts and foods that need more insulin, it adds a layer of difficulty.
Yeah. I like the idea of the law of like smaller numbers. If you can get things a little bit more in control as far as the carbohydrate intake, you're not dealing with the huge waves and crashes and trying to manage between those two. That sounds like an absolute nightmare. And so if you can just mellow out that curve, it seems way easier to manage.
Absolutely. Yep. The law of small numbers we use all the time. So when you're dealing with small numbers of carbs, you're dealing with small numbers of insulin, and you're going to have small mistakes. But if you're dealing big amount of carbs, you're going to need big amounts of insulin, and your potential for not getting it right is much bigger.
Yeah, that's very well explained. I appreciate that. Okay, so we go to kind of the medical side of things, and maybe also if you could explain what you would tell the same parent, like what would happen to your daughter again if we go back 110 years and we don't have medications for this? How does this end for a type 1 diabetic?
Before 1922, before the discovery of insulin.
Before 1922.
Yeah, I mean, it was just a matter of time. I mean, some could prolong it on a special diet, but there wasn't long then.
Just kind of waste away.
Oh, absolutely. It sounds miserable.
Yeah, interesting. Do you know much? I just finished Gary Taub's book, Rethinking Diabetes, which is a really interesting history, very in depth. How we kind of evolved with different medications or different forms of insulin over time. I believe it was fast-acting insulin that didn't even come into use until like the 1990s. Is that right?
Yeah, so I've done some research on that. In some of the research, we have a paper that was just recently done that said 62 types of insulin have been discontinued in the last several decades, none
Wow.
for safety or effectiveness. So Levemir is a big deal. We need this insulin. This would be our first chance to keep an insulin instead of watching these good insulins go away. There is no more beef or pork insulin. There was the Lenti series of insulin in the early 2000s, and that went away. It's just a real shame that our options are now actually decreasing instead of increasing. That's why this is a huge deal.
I was not aware of that. Do we know why so many of them have disappeared?
So I have a paper on it. Again, not for safety or effectiveness reasons, and it wasn't spelled out in the paper, but it's just the way the trends in the pharmaceutical industry. So they would have an insulin, it would be close to going off patent. They'd develop a new insulin and say, okay, you don't have this old one anymore. Now you get to use this new one. So there was no good reason.
Interesting. Does it have to do financially with what is it, like 15 years where you can have the patent on something and then you lose it, it becomes generic. And by that point, the financial motivations might be changing for some of these companies?
Right? Yeah, absolutely. And everything I say, I'm trying to have be based in research. So, but yeah.
That is really a shame. That's all I'm going to say about that. Okay, so I read the article that you did on USA Today. You were part of this article. It was really, really good. You mentioned that article, insulin pumps. Can you describe the difference between dosing insulin with an injection versus an insulin pump?
Absolutely. So with type 1 diabetes, you need insulin all the time. And an insulin pump can be a great tool. A lot of people love their insulin pumps, and that is a benefit of living when we do now, the advent of technology. My point is just to say that pumps are never going to be a solution for everyone. There's always going to be some people who can't use a pump, whether it's a financial reason. I mean, think of a teenage athlete. If you're a teenage athlete, some can make a pump work, but say you're a wrestler, you're heading out to a wrestling match. Do you want to take a shot and go play wrestle, or do you want to have a pump hooked to you? And I'm not, again, I don't want to put down pumps. We actually used one for 3 months, and for my daughter, it worked great during the week. On the weekends, though, it was tricky. The days of her competition, when you don't know what the weather's like, you don't know how many matches they have, they're sweating all day, they're running around, things are getting bumped. We just found several times we'd have to remove the pump and inject anyway. So for us, it's easier. You want to make that decision of how much insulin to inject the morning of or the night before. You don't want to be making that decision in the middle of a day of competition. So for us personally, the pump added a level of complexity instead of taking away, just because we have great management anyway. Some people, the pump helps them get better management, and they're great. Again, I don't want to take anything away from pumps, but so if you don't use a pump, if you do use a pump, then you just use fast-acting insulin. You don't use the long-acting basal insulin that I'm talking about. But if you don't use a pump, you need to take a bolus or fast-acting insulin with your meals, and then you also need a basal insulin to run in the background, and that kind of acts as the pump.
I see. And those are the only real two options. You have to do one of those two routes.
Yeah, you need the insulin pump or the regimen of injections. And if you're doing a regimen of injections, you can choose between 3 basal insulins. And people say, no, there's a lot of different insulins out there, but I would use the argument. It's kind of like, look, do you want to take Tylenol, acetaminophen, extra strength Tylenol, Walmart brand Tylenol? I mean, have I given you 4 options or 1? You know, so so one of the long-acting insulins comes by many names, but it's the same thing. So we really only have the 3.
Okay, and we mentioned this in the beginning, but let's kind of reiterate. What is it about Levemir in particular that makes it so effective?
Yeah, I love to talk about that. I feel like that's a big, there's the misconception that all the insulins are the same and it doesn't matter. And I like to talk about this. So we have a graph that Levemir only lasts in the body. We're using 14 hours. It does depend on the person and the dose, but it's definitely the shortest time of action of the 3 insulins. So the very fact that it just lasts this amount of time makes it perfect for those who have insulin needs that change all the time. So again, a teenage boy or girl, menstruating women, pregnant women, athletes, it's ideal. And there are athletes that use the other types of insulin, but Levemir is just great because it's got this short time. So if you get your, if my daughter takes an amount of basal insulin and then that night we can see, oh, your insulin needs have changed, we can fix that. The other 2, they last longer. Also, it's the only insulin that you can dilute, which is important for the insulin sensitive and newly diagnosed and infants and children. It's also preferred by experts in pregnancy, because when a woman's pregnant, she often has differing basal insulin needs the morning versus the evening, and it can accommodate for that. And when she delivers, there's an abrupt drop in the need of insulin, and Levemir accomplishes that. And can I tell you a quick story about that?
Please.
So when I was in Washington, D.C., one of the aides of one of the senators that I was meeting with said, oh, I just had a baby and I had gestational diabetes and I needed insulin just in the last part of my pregnancy. And she said, I actually only needed insulin at night. I didn't need it in the day. And so she said, my physician knew that Levemir would be perfect because she would take her shot of insulin at night and then it would wear off by the day when she didn't need it. And then when her baby was born, it quickly was out of her system and she didn't need it anymore. And I just think that's a great example because someone like her would never use an insulin pump. But if this Levemir wasn't available and she had to use a longer lasting insulin. So Tresiba is one of the other basal insulins, or Degludec. These 2 are made only by Novo Nordisk. And this one lasts 42 hours. So people often, if you make a change in the amount, you don't see it for a couple days, which is a big deal. Part of the reason we're able to get such tight control with my daughter is we slowly fluctuate all the time. I use the analogy, it's like riding a boat on a gently rocking wave, and we just watch it. And, oh, we've been a little low, we'll pull back a little bit, or, we've been a little high, we'll give a little more. And it works perfectly for us. So that's one of the reasons Levemir is so great. I don't like saying negative things about the other 2, but I feel like I need to point them out. Some people say, look, I do great on Lantus, or Basaglar. And I just say, that's great. I just have to point out some of the differences. So The glargine insulins are the middle of the three options. They're the ones that there are many generics or biosimilars, and they're made in an acidic solution. So the pH of the glargine insulins is a 4, and the pH of both the other two types are a 7.4. And so a lot of people notice that it's acidic. It hurts when you inject it. There's also more weight gain seen with the glargine insulins. And then also there's a potential for what's called Lantus low with the glargine insulins. The glargine insulins react differently with the bloodstream. And if injected into the blood, they can react and create an unexpected hypoglycemic event, which doesn't happen very often, but when it doesn't happen, it's a big deal. So that's, in a nutshell, some of the differences between the three insulins.
Interesting. What was the classification of the family of insulin? I've never heard of this. Glargine?
Glargine, yeah, those are Lantus and biosimilars. So some of the names that those come by are Lantus, and there's Basaglar, Tuheo is extra strength, Semglee, and Resovglar. Those are all glargine insulins, and they're all the same thing, pretty much.
Okay, interesting. What is the state of the state as far as cost of insulin goes? I remember hearing about this more so a few years ago. I can't say that I've heard as much about it now. The cost of insulin seemed like it was going really, really, really high, really quickly. What has been your experience as far as the cost over time?
So personally, we've been okay. Our insurance has covered it great. We did get a letter in November that Levemir wouldn't be covered anymore. And then we said, no, we need it back on. So they said, fine. And then a month later, they sent us another letter. And this time we called back and they said, okay, you'll have to pay a premium. But as I interact with others, some are finding the costs are going down, but others are not yet, unfortunately. So I do think there's a movement toward costs of insulin as a whole decreasing, partly because there are these biosimilars coming out. Several companies are working on more biosimilars currently of the glargine insulins and of fast-acting insulins. And as more of those biosimilars come, the prices should continue to come down. So there's your answer. It's coming down for a lot of people, but not for everyone.
Yeah, well, you hear all the time that kids don't give themselves enough insulin because it does make them gain weight. So that can be a really tricky thing, almost like an eating disorder with insulin because you gain weight. And so if you don't take it, you'll lose a bunch of weight. I can understand that. And I'm also thinking back to the article from USA Today that you were in. Didn't they say a certain percentage of people, like 15% of people, are not taking as much as they need because they can't afford it?
Yes, and I just think that's crazy. Hopefully that isn't happening as much anymore. But yeah.
I sure hope so. The way I understand it is to make insulin today is way inexpensive and should be done at a very, very low cost, but is not being as much provided, or at least again in the past that's at least something that I've heard. So that's all true.
Yeah, right. And it's confusing. And when we went to Washington, D.C. in February, I could tell there's like insulin fatigue. You know, people are getting tired of, everyone knows it's a problem and they want it fixed. And I do think we're heading towards pricing issue getting fixed. And I just would make the point, I'm here not to talk about price. I'm talking about availability.
Yeah, good point. Okay, so as this announcement came out in 2023, what did the company say they were going to do, and how were they going to discontinue this drug use? When again, you've got so many people that are using it to stay alive. Like, what did they propose? What have they done to this point?
So they used three arguments over and over again. And even we just had an article come out in Fox News on Friday, and the reporter reached out and they repeated the same thing again. So they're saying, number one, that there are global supply constraints. And we're saying, well, your company has just spent $16.5 billion to increase capacity of Ozempic and Wegovy, the GLP-1s. But anyway, that's the number one reason. Number two, they're saying that there are formulary losses, which is true. A lot of people are not able to get Levemir on their insurance plan. So we have that in 2021, there were over 1 million people in the US using Levemir. That's the last year we could get concrete figures. There are fewer now, but it's not out of choice. People are being forced off because they can't get it under their insurance plan. And that's a much bigger issue. That's kind of the insurance schemes. And it has to do with the pharmacy benefit managers, but it has to do with the manufacturers too. So that's a complicated one. And then the third thing they're repeating over again is that we're confident that you'll be able to get available options. And then they're repeating the same wording over and over again. This one was from the article on Friday. It says the company suggested patients switch to other basal insulin options, including but not limited to Basaglar, insulin degludec, insulin glargine U300, Lantus, Resovglar, Semglee, Tuheo, and Tresiba. Well, I just mentioned the biosimilars of, I mean, it looks like that's 8 options. That's actually 2 options. It's just different versions. Again, I use the same analogy. Tylenol, acetaminophen, Walmart brand Tylenol. I mean, it's all the same thing, right? So, and we're trying to say, look, these are different. No one's been able to develop this insulin because Novo Nordisk has held a patent on it. But I do have to say, so they sent a letter, an email to me and to several of the senators' offices that I visited in February. And they said on March 22nd that they won't assert a patent against a biosimilar of Levemir. So basically now we feel like we have the go-ahead that a company can make this, but it will take time. It takes years for a company to invest, start to make a new drug, have it widely available. So that's our main ask, is that Novo Nordisk slows down this discontinuation, produces it for several more years until a biosimilar is available, and that they work with the biosimilar manufacturer so that we have continued access to this excellent insulin that we really can't be without.
Yeah, and we've already alluded to this, and so maybe this is overly obvious, but just to restate, let's say the company says, nope, sorry, we're going to continue to discontinue this medicine. What are you looking at as far as options? What are people thinking about how they're going to proceed through this mess?
Absolutely. So we'll either need to use a pump or one of the other 2 insulins. It is interesting. I was on a group call with a physician from Yale just a few weeks ago, and she said, and we've seen this from other physicians too, already in her clinic, they're seeing patients be forced off of Levemir because they think it's going away, and so they're going off of it. And she said, we're seeing specific problems specifically in the adolescent population. We're seeing more difficulty controlling their blood sugar, more episodes of hypoglycemia, and an unexpected finding has been weight gain. So we weren't even using the weight gain piece as part of our arguments initially, but now you do a Google search and it's been shown in randomized controlled studies that the glargine insulins, there's more weight gain on those versus Levemir, which is Detamir. So but I have to tell my daughter, look, you got to choose. You can go to the glargine insulins, which will sting, and we have to think about the potential of Lantus lows, which can be dangerous. There might be some weight gain. We can go to degludec or Tresiba, which is long lasting and would be difficult to get the good control we have, or we need to use a pump. And the problem, so individually, we've used a pump before, and that's probably what she would do. When you're an athlete, a teenage athlete, and a lot of the other kids are at a similar level to you, everything you add that makes it a little complex, a little tougher, makes it a little tougher. And I just don't know if she would compete at her same level. I don't know. We're really in a tricky spot.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it's one thing as the mom to be going through all these options. She's got to be feeling pretty discouraged as well, I'm sure.
Yeah, she's happy though in her case to let me deal with this, and she's trying to just focus on being a kid. She doesn't want to get into this stuff. She's like, yeah, you take care of it, Mom. You'll figure it out.
Yeah, well, they definitely poked the mama bear for sure, and you did have to get involved. How did that start to kind of become obvious to you that this advocacy needed to be done, and you were the one that needed to do it?
The announcement came in November, and I was incredulous. I was like, really? No, you can't, this cannot happen. Like, this is so important for us. And I know there are other people it's important for. So I just started talking to people, anybody I knew. The first idea was, well, you could do a petition. So I started this petition on change.org. It's got over 3,000 signatures. The thing I like about that petition is the comments on it. I mean, it's tender. And there are a lot of people who I don't even know about. I got in an Uber car on my first trip this was in like January, and the Uber driver, I told him what I was doing there, and he said, what? My son takes Levemir. I had no idea it was even going to be discontinued. There are a lot of people out there that just don't even know about it. And then it's just kind of built from there. I just could tell that nobody else was dealing with this, and somebody had to do it. And I just feel like, why not? Why not us?
That's amazing. Well, you make an interesting point there with the driver. Like, you obviously are brilliant with this stuff, and you know all the different options. You already have plan B and plan C and plan D in place. This dude, think about that. Like, it just goes away all of a sudden. He can't get any. He's got to be able to think on the fly without probably being able to like balance all the alternatives. I'm sure a doctor's office is just going to write him a script for any of the other ones without maybe considering some of the potential pitfalls.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yep. It's
Wow.
huge.
Wow. How has the advocacy gone so far?
So I just feel like there is momentum. So in February, we spent a week in DC and met with the offices of 16 senators and 6 congressional representatives, and most were pretty supportive and wanted to be able to do something. I went back in March and met with 15 new offices of senators and 9 repeats. And just last week, 3 senators, Senators Shaheen, Warren, and Warnock, sent a letter to Novo Nordisk with specific concerns about this insulin. We've got talks in place with some pharmaceutical companies. I do feel that there's momentum building for sure.
Wow. What can they do on Capitol Hill about some of this stuff? Can they step in and legally make the company continue to produce this medication?
No, and that's the tricky thing. It's about pressure. It's about doing the right thing. And so we're asking for a lot of pressure. So far there's a letter. We're hopeful that this is just step one. And so I'm hoping that if people listen to this, that they will write. Senators are busy. They have so much on their plate. But if you write, if you live in the US, you have 2 senators and 1 congressional representative that you can send a message to and just say, hey, I'm concerned about this insulin situation for loved ones with diabetes. It's actually not, remember, it's not just about type 1 diabetes. There are people with gestational and type 2 diabetes that use this also. But yeah, I mean, we're not asking for specific legislation. We're asking for pressure.
Pressure. And you are finding that people reaching out to their senators is actually helping. I think oftentimes like people say like, oh, write to your senator and nothing ever seems to happen, but you are seeing some progress as far as that goes.
Oh, it's night and day. I'm hearing the aides of the legislators say, we need to hear from our constituents. We need to hear from them. And if you're a constituent, you don't have to have, like I have a niece who lives in Georgia, and I reached out to her and I said, hey, will you please tell Senator Warnock, thank you as a constituent. I've told him, but can you tell him? And she said, yeah. And you know what? I'm going to get my coworkers and my in-laws and my friends to say that also, because they got a lot on their plate. They need feedback, and the feedback matters for sure.
Yeah. And you made such a good point. We've already talked about pregnancy, but you also made the point about type 2 diabetes. If this medication goes away, are they faced with a lot of the same kind of concerns that type 1 patients are to type 2? Like what would happen if Levemir goes away?
I'm so focused on the type 1 community that I know that there are those in the type 2 community that use it, but I'm not as familiar with how it affects them as much. I just know that there are some that have used it, and definitely with gestational diabetes.
Wow. Okay. Interesting. So for those of us out there, what are the things that you would recommend? We mentioned a few. We mentioned the petition. You mentioned reaching out to your senators. What are some of the top things that we can do to help out with this movement?
Absolutely, the reaching out to your senators is a big one. And if you want to offer help, in whatever way we have, you'll list on your site our Facebook sites, and we've got an email, insulinoptions@gmail.com. You can reach out to us for more, but the biggest thing is reaching out to your senators, and that's what our ask is.
Okay, that's great. And what has your experience been like with that group that has been created on Facebook? Has that been very supportive? Have people been learning and coming up with alternate plans and things like that?
Yeah, it's tricky because you're only reaching, a certain amount of people on Facebook. And there are some physicians in this country who don't even know the benefits of Levemir. So it is tricky, but we're just moving forward. We've got a video we've compiled of many people and why they need Levemir, and we're going to be posting some little shorts. We're just throwing this together since November. So this is a pretty new movement, but yeah, we're doing the best we can, and it's encouraging.
I mean, that's a lot to have done with like in 6 months. This
Right?
seems like it hit really, really quickly. And so to be able to do as much as you've done already, that must be very encouraging.
Thank you. So can I give you a quick story?
Please.
In February, this was the first time we went to DC. I was with another mom, Jennifer Snooks, of a teenager, and we had these 22 meetings that week, and some meetings would go better than others. And in this particular meeting, it was with Mike Lee's aide, and Senator Lee is one of my senators in Utah here. And I had already met with this aide over Zoom right after and explained my concerns. And I had a binder of information that I gave to everyone we met with, and had this presentation. And so we gave the presentation. It went great. We had this discussion after that just went really well. And we had this back and forth. And then this aide, he started to laugh and he said, "Your presentation was awesome. Your binder is amazing. Man, this is what happens when you mess with a mom. You unleash hell." And I tell you that experience just to say I think about that, and this has unleashed something certainly in me, but there are others too who are saying, this is important. We need to find a way to figure out, why should it be that difficult to keep this essential insulin available? And it just needs to happen.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Don't mess with the mama bear. That is absolutely true. Wow. Well, you have been at this for 6 months. I have only just very recently been introduced to this story and how this is unfolding. We've hosted several people on our show who are type 1s that have managed their symptoms and their dosing with insulin by going on a low carbohydrate diet. There's some people as strict as like a carnivore diet. But all across the board, just seeing really great results as far as that goes. So I am a little ignorant as far as the medication goes. Is there anything that I have not asked you that you would want me to ask you about how we can fix this problem?
I think we've covered it. I just really hope that there's enough momentum and enough voices that we need to make this happen. And I need another company to know that they can step up and start to produce this insulin. It is unique. It is different. It is not easily replaceable with the other 2 basal insulins or with the pump. And it's important.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's amazing. Thank you so very much for bringing this to light. Obviously, nothing was going to stop you, the mama bear, from making this a big deal, but actually to take it to the level that you've taken it and make so much progress and to feel really optimistic that it's going in the right direction. That's awesome. That's great. I hope more people can find out about this and that the medical industry can be, a little bit louder in this as well. We'll definitely link to everything that you send us on the show notes so the listener can go and sign the petition. I just signed it a few minutes before jumping onto this call. Anything we can do to help will be amazing. We'll promote all of that. But for now, again, where can people go to find you and connect with you and your work? And how can people, again, make a difference?
If they can reach out to their representatives and just with a comment, just say, "Hey, please help this Levemir insulin situation." And you can reach us on Facebook at Alliance to Protect Insulin Choice, and at email, insulinchoice@gmail.com. And we'd love you to reach out to us. We'd love to connect.
Excellent. I think that's such a great idea, and to make yourself available to people that might have questions and might want to make sure that they're reaching out to the correct person in the correct way would be very, very helpful. So, yeah, all the best to you and to your daughter, who sounds like she's absolutely thriving. I think it's so amazing that you found a different way through, got some help with the lifestyle things, and changed the diet, and everybody in the family is feeling a lot better. I definitely would expect that as well. But I hope that this can turn a corner and people can get that message out there and actually do something about it. So thank you so very much, Alison, for all of your hard work. And thank you for coming on our show today to talk about this issue. We really, really appreciate you.
Thank you, Casey. Appreciate this so much. Really appreciate you.
Of course. It was an honor to host you. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.